These are the warm-ups for day 75, Thursday. So let's take a look at the first problem. It's that familiar problem that we've seen in the past where we are trying to write a proportion with respect to this graph that we have. So the graph shows the relationship between the weight and cost of apples at a store. And at this rate, how much would 5 pounds of apples cost? And so what they're asking for is dollars. How much is the amount of money? We just don't know how much money. So let's go ahead and look to see what they give us. The rate that they give us is along this line. Well, they give us one of the points on this line, 15, 9. Well, the 15 is the x component. It stands for the weight. And so what we can do is we can write 15 pounds over, and then 9 represents the cost. So $9. And so what we're going to end up doing is writing another ratio exactly the same way we wrote this one. So we have how much would 5 pounds cost. So we'll put 5 pounds up top and the amount of dollars in the denominator. And now we're ready to go ahead and solve. So what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and take out a common factor here, divide each of these numbers by 3, and that gives me smaller numbers to deal with. I could cross multiply, but before I do that, I'm looking at the two fractions, and I see here I have 5, and here I have 5. So that must mean that in order for these to equal, x must be 3. And so there it is, x equals $3. So I was able to come up with the answer without even having to cross multiply in that problem. Next problem asks us to find how many quarts are in 55 gallons. And so we have this 55-gallon drum, we want to find the number of quarts. So what we need to know is that conversion factor. And so the conversion factor is 4 quarts equals 1 gallon. And so what we're going to do is write that conversion factor as a ratio, 4 quarts per gallon. And so from there we could go ahead and write another ratio using the amount that we have. How many quarts are in a 55-gallon drum? So since I put gallons in the denominator, the 55 gallons is going to have to go in the denominator of that other fraction. And then we're going to write x quarts, because that's what we're trying to find. And so now we could go ahead and cross multiply here. 1 times x gives me x. 4 times 55 is what goes on the other side of the equal sign. And so off to the side, we'll go ahead and multiply out that 4 and the 55. We get 20. This makes 22, so that would give us our answer. X equals 220 quarts. And it makes sense because the number of gallons is a larger unit. And so since quarts is smaller, we're going to have more of those. The next problem asks us to determine whether these two triangles are similar. So the first thing to look at is the corresponding angles and see if they're the same. We've got 120 and 120, 38 and 38, 22 and 22. So far so good. Now we're going to go ahead and check the corresponding sides. So between 38 and 120 is 3. So let's start with that. And between 38 and 120 is 12. So we'll use that one. And then we'll reduce the fraction. We'll take out that common factor of 3, and I'm left with 1 over 4. And so I'll do the same thing with all the other angles to make sure they all have the same proportion, that they are all the same fraction. So we look at 120 to 22 is 5. 120 to 22 is 20. So far, so good. Still, we have 1/4, 1/4, but we need to check the last one. So the last one is 7, and this one is 21. They're both between the same angles, 38 and 22, 38 and 22. And so when I reduce this fraction, I have a problem. See, 1/3 is not the same thing as 1/4. So that means they're not similar. Not similar, and we have to state why. So the reason would be that the sides, the corresponding sides, we'll say because here, so not similar because the corresponding sides are not proportional. So we have to state why. We can't just say yes or no. We have to state why. So let's take a look at our next one here. It says triangle ABC is similar to DEF. So we know they're similar. So now we can find an unknown length. So let's look at x. Let's use that. That's the one we need to find. Now we need to find the side that corresponds to x. So let's see what it's between, F and E. So E and F right here. So that means that the same location would be B and C on the other equation, on the other triangle. So between B and C is 36. And so let's set up another one. Let's use 35 this time. And I just picked 35 rather than 45 just because the number was smaller and probably easier to deal with. And 35 is between D and E. So here's D and E. So between D and E is the same spacing as A and B. So see how AB is first, DE is first. That's why those are similar, or corresponding, I should say. So A to B is 21. So now before we go and cross multiply, let's try to make these numbers smaller. So I'm going to take out a common factor here of 7. And so this will become 5, and this will become 3. And now I have easier numbers to deal with. So now I'll cross multiply. 3 times x is 3x. And over here, 5 times 36. Let's multiply that out. 5 times 36. So that makes 30. Carry a 3. That's 15 and 3 make 18. So 180. And so from this point, all you have to do is divide by 3. And so when I do that division, it gives me x equals 60. So 60 centimeters is our answer. And the next one talks about a photograph was enlarged and made into a poster. The poster is 20.5 inches long, 36 inches wide. The scale factor is 5 to 1. So 5 to 1 tells us it's bigger. 5 to 1 is the same thing as saying 5 to 1 this way, and this is our model. So the model is bigger than the actual. And it even tells us that because they said it was enlarged. And so it says find the length of the original photograph. So the length here is 20 and 5/10. The poster is. So that's the model. So we're going to write down 20 and 5/10, and that's the model, over x, and because that's what we're trying to find. And so we're going to cross multiply. So I've got 5x equals 1 times 20 and 5/10. And then I do the division. And actually, I could do this one in my head, even though it seems tough because of that decimal point. 5 goes into 24 times. Bring the decimal point straight up. And 5 goes into 5 one time. So there it is, 4 1/10 inches. That's the length of the original photograph. Now we have some honeybees produce 7 pounds of honey for each pound of wax. So each pound means 1 pound of wax. We could restate that. Honeybees produce 7 pounds of honey for 1 pound of wax. Either way, it means the same thing. So that's our factor that we're going to use. So that is our ratio, 7 pounds of honey for each pound of wax. So 1 pound of wax. Now we're going to write another equation, or another ratio. And so that's going to go this way. How many pounds of honey? We don't know the amount of pounds of honey. So that's our variable x. Pounds of honey for 145 pounds of wax. So 145 pounds of that wax. So we're ready to multiply. Cross multiply here. So 7 times 145 and 1 times x. Well, 1 times x is easy. That's just x. So off to the side, we need to do 145 times by 7. So that makes 35. Carry a 3. 28 and 3 make 31. And 7 and 1 makes 7, plus 3 makes 10. So there it is, 1,015 pounds of honey. So there it is. So those are some of the problems that we'll see on the test, very similar problems to the test problems. So I recommend copying down some of those problems again and trying to redo them if you want to do well in the test. It's the best way to study.